Nobody could have predicted what would happen that morning. The hot Mississippi sun was just beginning to rise. The cotton fields were covered with white clouds. But for Elijah, these fields were only pain and hope. Elijah was a young slave. He was 14 years old, but his hands were as calloused as an adult's. Every morning he woke up before the sun rose and went to the fields. He worked until the sun set in the evening. All day long he bent over, picked cotton, and carried huge sacks on his back to his master's warehouse. But there was something else inside Elijah. A fire, a hope, a dream. One day, while cleaning in his master's big house, the library door had been left ajar. Elijah had looked inside. There were hundreds of books on the walls. Elijah's heart began to beat rapidly. He had never seen a book before. Slaves had no right to read. If he was caught, he would be whipped, maybe worse. But curiosity was stronger than him. After that night, he began to sneak into the library whenever he had the chance. When his master was at dinner, Elijah would take the books in his hands for a few minutes and look at the pages. At first, he couldn't recognize the letters, but over time, he began to understand some things. One night, his master's daughter caught him. A young white girl named Mary saw Elijah standing with a book in his hand. Elijah froze in fear, but Mary did something surprising. She smiled. Mary asked if he was trying to read. Elijah bowed his head and apologized, promising never to do it again. Mary looked around. No one was there. Then she quietly closed the door and approached Elijah. She told him she would show him something, and that night Mary taught him his first letters. For months, Mary secretly taught Elijah to read and write. Every night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Elijah would practice by candlelight in the small room behind the kitchen. As he learned to read, the hope inside him grew even bigger. But one day, everything changed. His master's son, a young and ruthless man named Thomas, caught Elijah reading a book in the library. He snatched the book from Elijah's hand and threw it to the ground. Thomas demanded to know how a slave could read. Elijah said nothing. He just stood upright. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination. Thomas ran to his master and told him that the slave was reading books and demanded to know who taught him. The master came in anger. He took Elijah out into the garden. He gathered all the other slaves too. Everyone had to watch. The master had Elijah tied to a tree. Then he took out his whip. When the first blow came, Elijah's back burned. When the second blow came, blood began to flow. 10 blows. 20 blows. Elijah did not cry. He just clenched his teeth. But he told himself inside that this pain was temporary, but knowledge was permanent. The master could beat him but could not take away what he had learned from his mind. That night, an old slave named Uncle Moses bandaged Elijah's wounds. He looked into Elijah's eyes and told him that he was special, that God had chosen him for a reason, and that he carried hope not just for himself, but for all of them. Elijah could not sleep that night. The pain in his back was too severe, but there was only one thought in his head. One day he would be free. One day, people would treat him as an equal, and when that day came, he would give hope to others too. Years passed. Elijah grew up. The war began. The Civil War. The war that would bring freedom to the slaves. Elijah escaped from the plantation and fought in the Northern Army. When the war was over, he was free. But he had no money. He had no home. His family was scattered. But Elijah did not give up. He knew how to read and write. This was his greatest weapon. He started working as a teacher in a small school. He taught other freed slaves to read and write. He gave them hope. Elijah would tell them that their ancestors were born as slaves, but their children would grow up free and would do better. He taught during the day and studied at night. He learned mathematics, history, and philosophy. He became one of the most educated black men in his county. White people mocked him. They told him that no matter how much he learned, he would always be inferior. But Elijah did not listen. He continued to teach, to learn, to grow. One evening, a young white man came to his school. The man was a journalist from the North. He wanted to write about Elijah's story. Elijah told him everything about the beatings, about learning to read in secret, about the war, about freedom. The journalist wrote an article that was published in newspapers across the country. People were moved by Elijah's story. Some sent money to help his school. Others sent books. But not everyone was happy. Some white men in the town were angry. They did not want black people to be educated. One night they came to Elijah's school with torches. They burned it to the ground. Elijah stood outside and watched as everything he had built turned to ash. But he did not cry. He did not scream. He just stood there, his face illuminated by the flames, and whispered to himself that they could burn his school, but they could not burn his knowledge or his hope. The next day, Elijah started rebuilding. With his own hands, and with the help of other freed slaves, he built a new school. This one was bigger, stronger, and it had a sign that read, "Knowledge is freedom." More students came. Men, women, children. Everyone wanted to learn. Elijah taught them all. He taught them that education was the path to true freedom, that no one could take away what was in their minds. Years later, when Elijah was an old man, he sat in his classroom surrounded by his students. His hair was white. His body was bent, but his eyes still had that fire. A young boy raised his hand and asked him what kept him going. All these years, Elijah smiled. He told the boy that he kept going because he remembered where he came from. He remembered the cotton fields. He remembered the whip. He remembered the chains. And he remembered that his ancestors never gave up, so neither would he. Elijah died in that classroom, teaching until his last breath. His students carried his coffin through the streets. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects, white and black, young and old. They all knew that Elijah was more than just a teacher. He was a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the power of education. His legacy lived on. His students became teachers. They taught their children, and their children taught their children. The knowledge that Elijah had fought so hard to gain was passed down through generations. The fire that burned in his heart never went out. It spread, it grew, it became a wildfire that no one could extinguish. But the struggle was far from over. Even after slavery ended, black people in America faced discrimination, violence, and injustice. They were denied jobs because of the color of their skin. They were denied housing because of where they came from. They were denied basic human dignity because of who they were. But they kept fighting. They kept pushing. They kept hoping, because that was what Elijah had taught them. That was his gift to them. Fast forward to the present day. Marcus Johnson was 12 years old. He lived in the south side of Chicago. His school was old and broken. The teachers had lost hope. Marcus's mother worked 3 jobs but still could not afford the rent. Marcus walked home from school every day. Gang members stood on the corners. Marcus kept his head down and walked quietly, but his mind was always full of books. One day the school librarian, Mrs. Williams, approached him. She was an elderly black woman. There was wisdom in her eyes. She told Marcus that she had been watching him and that he was different, that he loved reading. Marcus smiled shyly and confirmed that he loved books. Mrs. Williams gave him a book and told him to keep it, read it, and never let it go. Marcus looked at the book. It read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. That night, Marcus lay in his old bed under a broken lamp and began to read that book. He read about Frederick Douglass's life, how he was born a slave, how he learned to read, how he fought for his freedom. Marcus cried. But these tears were not pain. They were hope. He told himself that if Douglass could do it, so could he. But life was not easy. When Marcus entered high school, his friends started making fun of him. They asked him why he always read books. Marcus told them it was because he wanted to get out of there. His friends laughed and said that people like them could not get out. But Marcus did not listen. He went to school every day. He studied every night. Even his teachers tried to stop him. His math teacher asked him why he was trying so hard, and told him that he would not succeed anyway. Marcus looked at him. There was anger and determination in his eyes. He told the teacher that he was wrong. that he would succeed not just for himself, but for his ancestors who never had this opportunity, and that he would not waste it. Marcus continued to study every night. Sometimes he was hungry. Sometimes the electricity was cut off, but he never stopped. He fought for 4 years. And finally, a letter came. It congratulated Marcus Johnson on being accepted to Harvard University with a full scholarship. When Marcus read the letter, his knees trembled. His mother cried. The neighbors shouted with joy. His mother told him that he had done it. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Being at Harvard was not easy. Marcus was the only black student in his class. The other students were from wealthy families. Their fathers were lawyers, doctors, CEOs. Marcus's mother was a cleaning lady. Sometimes professors spoke to him condescendingly. One professor asked him how he had gotten there. Marcus calmly replied that he had gotten there by working hard. He fought for 4 more years, and he graduated with the highest grades. Now Marcus was 35 years old. He was the CEO of his own technology company. His office was in Manhattan, in a glass building overlooking the sky. But Marcus never forgot where he came from. Every year he returned to the South Side neighborhood. He gave talks to young people. He gave them scholarships. He gave them hope. One day, a young boy asked him how he had succeeded. Marcus smiled. There were tears in his eyes. He told the boy that he succeeded because his ancestors were chained but never gave up because they could not read. But he could read because they were not free. But he was free, and because he was living their dreams. Marcus remembered his great-great-great-grandfather Elijah, whose story had been passed down through generations. He remembered the cotton fields. He remembered the whip. He remembered the schoolhouse that was burned to the ground. And he remembered the fire that never went out. That same fire burned in Marcus's heart. It burned in the hearts of millions of black Americans who fought every day against discrimination, against prejudice, against injustice. They fought not with weapons but with knowledge, with dignity, with hope. Marcus stood at the window of his office and looked out at the city. He thought about all the black men and women who had come before him, the slaves who picked cotton under the burning sun, the freedmen who built schools with their bare hands, the activists who marched for civil rights, the students who integrated schools despite death threats, the entrepreneurs who built businesses despite being denied loans, the artists who created beauty despite being told they were not good enough. All of them had contributed to his success. All of them had paved the way for him. And now it was his turn to pave the way for others. Marcus had started a foundation that provided scholarships to underprivileged students. He had opened mentorship programs that connected young black students with successful professionals. He had invested in schools in poor neighborhoods. He had created job training programs for those who had been incarcerated. He did all of this because he knew that his success was not his alone. It belonged to his community. It belonged to his ancestors. It belonged to everyone who had fought and sacrificed so that he could have this opportunity. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from Mrs. Williams, the librarian who had given him that book all those years ago. She was now in her 80s, and her voice was weak. She told Marcus that she did not have much time left, and that she wanted to see him. Marcus immediately drove to Chicago and went to her house. He sat by her bedside and held her hand. Mrs. Williams looked at him with pride in her eyes. She told him that she knew from the moment she saw him that he was special, that he reminded her of the stories her grandmother had told her about their ancestor Elijah, and that she saw the same fire in his eyes. Marcus was shocked. He asked her if she was related to Elijah. Mrs. Williams smiled and nodded. She told him that Elijah was her great-grandfather, and that his blood ran through their veins. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. All this time he had been inspired by Elijah's story without knowing that they were family. Mrs. Williams squeezed his hand and told him that Elijah would be proud of him, that he was carrying on the legacy, and that he should never forget where he came from. She closed her eyes and took her last breath with a smile on her face. Marcus sat there for a long time, holding her hand, tears streaming down his face. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the cotton fields of Mississippi to the boardrooms of Manhattan, from slavery to freedom, from illiteracy to education, from poverty to wealth. It was a journey of pain, of struggle, of sacrifice, but it was also a journey of hope, of resilience, of triumph. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the Chicago skyline. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He thought about Elijah standing in that burned schoolhouse, refusing to give up. He thought about all the black men and women who had come after him, fighting for their rights, fighting for their dignity, fighting for their future. And he thought about all the young people who were fighting today, facing the same struggles, facing the same discrimination, but refusing to give up. Marcus picked up his phone and called his assistant. He told her to arrange a town hall meeting in the South Side neighborhood for the following week. He wanted to talk to the young people there. He wanted to tell them Elijah's story. He wanted to tell them Mrs. Williams' story. He wanted to tell them his own story. He wanted to give them hope, because that was what his ancestors had done for him, and that was what he would do for the next generation. The following week, hundreds of young people gathered in a community center in the South Side. Marcus stood on the stage and looked out at the crowd. He saw himself in their faces. The same hunger, the same determination, the same fire. He began to speak. He told them about Elijah, a slave who learned to read in secret and was whipped for it, but never gave up. He told them about the schoolhouse that was burned to the ground and rebuilt stronger than before. He told them about Mrs. Williams, who dedicated her life to education and inspired countless students. He told them about his own journey from the South Side to Harvard, to Wall Street, and he told them that they could do it too. Marcus looked out at the young faces staring back at him with hope in their eyes. He told them that the road would not be easy, that they would face discrimination and obstacles, but that they should never give up because their ancestors had faced worse and had survived. He told them that education was their weapon, that knowledge was their power, and that hope was their strength. He told them that they were not alone, that they stood on the shoulders of giants, and that they carried the dreams of generations. When Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Young people came up to him with tears in their eyes and thanked him for inspiring them. Parents hugged him and told him that he was a role model for their children. Teachers shook his hand and told him that his words had given them renewed hope. Marcus felt a warmth in his heart that he had never felt before. This was his purpose. This was his calling. This was his way of honoring his ancestors. As Marcus drove back to his hotel that night, he thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the long journey from slavery to freedom. He thought about the struggles that black people still face today: systemic racism, police brutality, economic inequality, educational disparities, housing discrimination. The list went on, but he also thought about the progress that had been made. The chains had been broken. The schools had been integrated. The laws had been changed. Black people were doctors, lawyers, teachers, CEOs, presidents. They had come so far, but there was still so far to go. Marcus knew that the fight was not over. Every day, black men and women woke up and faced a world that still saw them as less than. Every day, they had to work twice as hard to get half as far. Every day, they had to prove that they belonged. But every day, they kept fighting. They kept pushing. They kept hoping. Because that was what their ancestors had taught them. That was the legacy of Elijah and countless others who had refused to accept the world as it was and had fought to make it better. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and looked up at the night sky. The stars were shining brightly. He thought about Elijah looking up at the same stars from the cotton fields of Mississippi, dreaming of freedom. He thought about all the slaves who had looked up at those stars and sung spirituals about a better day coming. He thought about all the freedom fighters who had looked up at those stars and imagined a world where their children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And Marcus made a promise. He promised that he would never stop fighting. He would never stop working. He would never stop hoping. He would use his success to lift others up. He would use his platform to speak truth to power. He would use his resources to create opportunities for those who had been denied them. He would be the change that he wanted to see in the world. Because that was what Elijah would have done. That was what Mrs. Williams would have wanted. That was what his ancestors deserved. Marcus got back in his car and continued driving. The road ahead was long. The journey was far from over, but he was ready. He carried the fire of his ancestors in his heart. He carried their hopes and dreams in his soul, and he would not let them down. From the cotton fields of Mississippi to the glass towers of Manhattan, the journey had been long and painful, but it had also been beautiful and triumphant. It was a journey of a people who had been beaten down but had risen up, a people who had been denied their humanity but had claimed it anyway, a people who had been told they were nothing but had proven they were everything. Elijah's descendants were free today, but the struggle was not over. The chains had been broken, but the prejudices still remained. Yet there was hope, because their ancestors had seen worse and had still survived. Because the fire that Elijah had lit in that schoolhouse had never gone out. It had been passed down through generations, burning brighter with each passing year, and it would continue to burn until true equality was achieved, until every black child could grow up without fear, until every black parent did not have to worry about their child being killed for the color of their skin, until every black person could walk with their head held high, knowing that they were valued, respected, and loved. That was the dream. That was the promise. That was the hope. And Marcus Johnson, standing on the shoulders of giants, would do everything in his power to make it a reality. Because he was not just living for himself. He was living for Elijah. He was living for Mrs. Williams. He was living for every slave who had picked cotton in the fields. He was living for every freedman who had built schools with their bare hands. He was living for every activist who had marched for civil rights. He was living for every person who had fought and sacrificed so that he could be where he was today. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting its golden light on the city below. Marcus stood at his office window and smiled. A new day had begun. A new chapter was being written. And the story was far from over. The journey from cotton fields to Wall Street had been long, but the journey to true equality was even longer, and Marcus was ready for it. Because he carried the fire, because he carried the hope, because he carried the dreams of his ancestors, and nothing could extinguish that flame.